So as we narrow the view screen size, we wanted to show a similar response to that we saw when we were using the RWD grid system. But this time we're using Flexbox. We'll take a look at settings that enabled these two columns to break at a particular width. And then at the same time, this column broke off to form a new row and occupy 100%. The posts within it responded so that they now share space across the row. And this was done with the Media Query enabled Flex item. And we'll look at how that was done. We'll also look at the action of these three columns. We noticed that this third column breaks off around 1070, but then instead of forming two columns, it forms one column. And this time we'll go ahead and use a Media Query enabled Flex Container to enable Flexbox using a different method so that two posts share in a row when there's two columns above it. And we can get a better idea of how this is working by examining our actual widths that we've chosen versus the settings we've made. So we'll bring the viewer's viewport size down just before the advertisement column breaks to a new row. We've set our primary column to display flex. We've set the flex wrap to wrap. Looking in the inspector, we see that the primary column has 752 px available for row sharing for the flex items. If we take a quick look at our settings of the flex item positioning of these left and right columns, we see that the left flex box column has a flex spaces value of 615. The right flex column has a flex basis of 80. So the flex basis values act as a minimum width for row sharing of flex items. So if the parent column width space available is less than of these two flex spaces values added up, plus any margin spacing, row wrapping will occur. We also set the flex grow at 80 versus 4 for the right column, which the left column to grow at a rate of 20 times that of the advertisement column. You'll notice we also set a flex shrink on the left column, and that's because of the large flex basis setting that we have, because we don't want that column to maintain the 615 width on view screens less than 615. So by setting the flex shrink, it'll allow it to shrink and prevents any column overflow. So getting back to our inspector, viewing the computed size of the left column just before the two break to a new row, we see that the 618 is our width value at this view screen size. And that's close to our 615 flex basis value, and it has margins of 18, so that's about 37 plus 618 is 655. And then for our advertisement column, it's 80 with the same as our flex basis setting, and then it has a margin of 15 taken together, so that's 95, and then 95 plus 655 gives us the 750. So basically, as the primary column space becomes limited at 752, our left and right column will no longer share row space, and on smaller view screens, it breaks to a new row. When the advertisement breaks to a new row, the normal Flexbox behavior is for it to share 100% of the column width, which is just what we want. However, we want the post to respond at the same time and go from sharing 100% of the row to 15% of the row. So how did we do this? Well, if we go up to the parent column and we check our Flexbox settings, we go to the Flex Container settings. We don't want to mess with the Flex Item settings. That's for positioning the whole column itself. Turning on the Flex Positioning for the post within this column, we initiated Flex and we initiated Wrap, and we left the positioning choices default. Go down to our individual Flex posts, and we see that we chose a Flex Media Query, which means that the Flex settings we made will not be initiated unless we meet the Media Query requirement, and for this one it's a max width of 750. So at a max width of 750, we basically turn on our flex basis, which is set to 15%. Now, at other widths, which would be above 750, Flexbox will not be initiated at all in the post. The default setting in the main width option is actually going to be 100%, and that's already set up. So that way, our posts at the widths above 750, they're occupying 100% of this column. When this column breaks to a new row, It actually occupies more space, but then the posts within it are now sharing only 15% of the parent column, and we get the effect of seeing these advertisement posts float next to one another. So that's one way we can use media queries to enhance Flex for specific operations. Next, we're going to look at the response of these three columns. Now we see around 1100 px, this third column, it breaks to a new row. And basically that was done the same way that the two primary Flex columns broke to a new row. So the settings of the basis width within the Flex item settings of these three columns, along with any space settings, sets the minimum width at which the parent column would have to be in order for these three posts to share row space together. This happens at a viewport sizes less than 1070 px, and then the third column is simply forced to break to a new row. So it gives us the behavior we're looking for. Similarly, at view screen sizes less than 615, the parent column cannot contain the first two columns sharing row space together because of their Flex basis and spacing settings. So at that point, the first two columns also break to a single row. We want the posts within the third column to share 50% across the row. That's two posts across. Then below 615, each post to occupy 100% of the row, like the other two columns above it. Setting up this effect is fairly straightforward. And this time we're going to go ahead and use a media query in our Flex container settings within the third column. We'll be sure to choose Flex container and not the Flex item within this column options. So we'll set it to Flex, and it's going to be wrap, and we'll leave the default positioning for other choices. And the trick this time is we're going to choose a max width setting of 1070 and a min width setting of 618. So between these two settings, our Flex items will be activated, and they'll go ahead and share 49%. So that'll be two posts across, making up a total of 100%. There's also a margin spacing of 1% in there. And then on any screens with the viewport size less than 615 or over the 1070, the default main width setting of 100% in each of the post Flex item settings will take effect. Because the Flex item settings will not be enforced without an active Flex container setting. And we've already gone ahead and set up a width of 100% for each of the posts within this column. Let's go to the first post within the third column, and we'll set the Flex basis to 49%. So here we don't need to set Flex grow option because it'll share 49% at all active Flex widths. We'll go ahead and export this setting to all the other posts within this parent column. There's also a nested column containing two of the posts, so we're going to go ahead and check the export to the nested column within the same parent column option. When we go ahead and we look at the web page mode, so now we see our third column has posts within it at 100% above 1070. We get to 1070 and below, and now we see the posts within the column are now two across as the Flex item setting is now activated. We narrow the view screen down, and then all the posts within the first, second, and now third column are sharing 100% of the available row space. So as we see, using Flexbox this way is definitely doable. However, for this particular setup of columns and the responses that we wanted, RWD grid system or the alternative RWD percentage system is easier to set up. The RWD grid system and an alternative system respond very accurately according to the media queries, whereas Flexbox was a bit spongy. For example, when we set a min width at 618, we found it responded accordingly at 615. Flexbox shines more so when breakpoints aren't necessary with its fluid-like width sharing and ability to differentially share at different rates. It has a variety of positioning features for spacing rows and posts in a row or a column. Whereas the RWD grid system is perfect when it comes to creating different organizational structures at different view screen widths. One last thing. Currently, Flexbox is not expressed in edit mode. The columns we were looking at in edit mode were expressed in width percentages, and that the flex basis, whereas Flexbox is active in web page mode, and the flex basis setting overrides the width percentage that we used. So this time we're looking at Flexbox turned on for edit mode. And what happens is the z-index priority of these open hidden elements gets obscured because Flexbox has its own stacking order. So we haven't gotten around that yet.